March 5, 1944. The air war over Europe had reached a turning point, and on this cold morning, a new presence in the sky began reshaping everything the enemy believed about air combat. This is the story behind why German pilots feared the P-51 Mustang, a fear that didn't come instantly, but grew mission after mission, until even the most experienced adversaries realized the skies no longer belonged to them. The first encounters began in scattered reports. German pilots returning from sorties described a long-winged American fighter they initially mistook for earlier Allied models. But their tone changed quickly. They spoke of an aircraft that climbed faster than expected, that held altitude longer, that didn't break off a fight even when deep over hostile territory. It wasn't just fast, it stayed fast at the moments when German fighters usually gained the advantage. Something about it felt different, and soon fear replaced curiosity. At that time, German fighter units relied heavily on altitude and energy tactics. They had mastered surprise dives and high-speed passes designed to break apart bomber formations. For years, this strategy worked. They could hit hard, hit fast, and get away before escorts reacted. But in early 1944, something began disrupting those tactics. German pilots reported being intercepted far earlier than expected, sometimes before they even reached the bomber stream. They noticed that this new fighter climbed nearly as well as their own best interceptors, and even more unsettling, it seemed to appear in places where previous escorts couldn't reach. It wasn't just performance, it was persistence. Pilots who tried traditional escape dives found the Mustang still behind them. Those who climbed steeply into thin air saw it climbing too. Those who ran for distant airfields found it chasing them down even as fuel became scarce. The Mustang didn't behave like other American fighters. It flew differently, fought differently, and stayed in the fight far longer than anyone predicted. German squadron leaders started analyzing what made this aircraft so threatening. One key factor was its high-altitude performance. Many engagements took place above 25,000 feet, where engines struggled and pilots fought, not only the enemy, but thin, freezing air. Germany's top fighters, sleek, lightweight interceptors, were designed for quick bursts of combat, not extended, high-altitude chases. But the Mustang thrived there. Its engine kept delivering power, even in thin air, giving it a crucial advantage during long climbs or repeated maneuvers. Another factor was range, something pilots felt before they understood it. German fighters were accustomed to fighting escorts only at certain predictable points of a mission. They knew roughly when American fighters had to turn back. They knew when bombers became vulnerable. But suddenly, those windows of vulnerability closed. The Mustang didn't turn back. It stayed with the bombers far deeper into contested airspace than anyone expected. This shift forced German pilots to make dangerous choices. If they attacked early, they risked being intercepted and losing altitude and energy too soon. If they waited, the bombers reached their targets under protection. Trying to split formations or bait escorts became harder because the Mustang pilots coordinated tightly and maneuvered with confidence, breaking up planned attacks before they even formed. Fear grew, not because the Mustang outperformed in one category, but because it outperformed in all the categories that mattered in real combat. Speed, climb, endurance, stability, and control all came together in a way the enemy did not anticipate. But something else added to their growing anxiety: the Mustang's behavior in a fight. German pilots were trained to expect American escort fighters to protect bombers closely. They were used to defensive escorts, fighters that reacted, not initiated. The Mustang changed that entirely. It didn't wait for attacks, it hunted. German pilots described how Mustangs roamed ahead of bomber formations, sometimes miles ahead, sweeping the skies clean of interceptors before the bombers even arrived. They formed loose layers, almost like invisible walls in the sky. Any attempt to climb into attack position risked early detection. Any attempt to gather in groups risked interception. It was as if the Mustang pilots were everywhere, eliminating the freedom of movement the enemy once relied on. The psychological effect was profound. Veteran German aces, pilots with hundreds of missions, began cautioning younger flyers about the dangers of engaging Mustangs alone. They warned that the Mustang had excellent acceleration, making escape difficult. They warned that its dive did not resemble other American fighters. It could dive steeply without shaking apart or losing control. They warned that head-on attacks became riskier because the Mustang's stability allowed precise defensive fire. Fear didn't come from a single battle. It came from pattern recognition, mission after mission showing the same outcome. And soon, German pilots realized that the Mustang wasn't merely another fighter. It represented a shift in the balance of the entire air war. But fear deepened further when pilots learned something else. The Mustang wasn't just a fast fighter. It was flown increasingly by highly trained, aggressive, and coordinated American pilots who embraced their new capabilities fully. They flew with confidence, born from superior equipment and evolving tactics. They climbed early, held altitude, and waited for the moment to strike. They engaged strategically, not impulsively. To the enemy, this discipline looked like an unstoppable force. German intelligence units started collecting wreckage and analyzing downed Mustangs to understand what made them so efficient. Engineers studied airflow characteristics, wing design, radiator placement, and engine performance. Reports circled through command structures, noting that the Mustang's aerodynamic design allowed for excellent stability at high speeds and during tight turns. They noted that the aircraft retained energy exceptionally well during maneuvers. They noted that it could dive steeply without structural issues. No matter how they studied it, the conclusion remained the same. The Mustang had no obvious weaknesses that could be exploited with traditional tactics. But German pilots feared something else, something less technical and more personal. The Mustang was unforgiving to mistakes. Any slip, any hesitation, any miscalculated climb or dive often resulted in immediate disadvantage. Pilots knew that if a Mustang gained the superior position, escape became nearly impossible. Fear grew not because they doubted their skills, but because they understood the margin for error had vanished. By the spring of 1944, the Mustang had become a defining force in the air war. Entire attack formations that once struck Allied bombers with confidence now hesitated to engage. German squadron leaders adjusted strategies, trying to time attacks earlier or later than expected, only to find Mustangs already waiting. Reports noted that attempts to surprise bombers failed repeatedly. The element of surprise, a key advantage in aerial warfare, had shifted sides entirely. At the same time, the Mustang's presence helped erode the enemy's veteran ranks. Experienced pilots who once held the balance began to fall. Younger pilots, with far less training, were forced into combat against a fighter that demanded flawless decision-making. The outcome became predictable. Many didn't survive long. This rapid decline in pilot quality magnified the Mustang's effectiveness even further. Fear, in this context, wasn't panic. It was recognition of a harsh reality. The Mustang had reshaped the air domain in a way no other Allied fighter had done. It forced the enemy into reactive strategies, reduced their options, and punished every mistake ruthlessly. And as German pilots faced more encounters with the Mustang, a truth became impossible to deny. This new fighter wasn't just a threat. It was a symbol of an approaching shift in the entire war. The sky, once dominated by the enemy, had a new ruler. Even as the air war reached its peak, German pilots continued searching for a pattern, some weakness in the Mustang, some predictable behavior they could exploit. But mission after mission, They found only adaptability. The Mustang didn't just outperform them, it denied them every type of engagement they preferred. Fast head-on attacks were countered by disciplined American formations. Hit-and-run strikes failed because the Mustang could accelerate instantly to give chase. High-altitude ambushes, once their most reliable tactic, fell apart the moment they realized the Mustang was already above them, gliding effortlessly with energy to spare. As the months went on, German pilots began noticing something else. The Americans no longer seemed rushed. Mustang formations flew with confidence, not urgency. They didn't dive impulsively, didn't break formation at the wrong time, didn't waste altitude. They moved with purpose, like pilots who knew that the aircraft beneath them gave them an edge in almost every scenario. That professional calm made the Mustang feel even more threatening. An opponent who panics is predictable. An opponent who stays composed while flying a superior machine is far more dangerous. Many German pilots later wrote that the most unsettling moment of a mission was not the initial sighting of the Mustang. It was when they realized escape was no longer possible. A Bf-109 or FW-190 could dive away with incredible speed, but the Mustang held its line, kept its energy, and closed distance, even when it seemed mathematically unlikely. For the first time, pilots who had survived dozens of missions felt the odds shifting against them. Each encounter chipped away at morale, and every briefing began with new warnings about the fighter that refused to give them space to breathe. What made the Mustang truly feared was not a single feature, but a combination. Long range meant no safe zones. High speed meant no clean retreats. Stability meant precise firing. Climb rate meant control of altitude. Range of vision from the bubble canopy meant superior situational awareness. And reliability meant the aircraft performed the same way at the start of a mission as it did after hours in the sky. German pilots weren't facing just another machine. They were facing a design philosophy that solved the exact problems that had kept the Allies vulnerable for years. By the end of 1944, the pattern was clear. Wherever the Mustang appeared, the air began to belong to the Allies. And wherever the Mustang patrolled, German fighters hesitated. What had once been a contest of skill and bravery was now defined by strategy, reach, and the brutal arithmetic of air superiority. In that new reality, the Mustang was the aircraft that closed the gap between ambition and victory. It didn't win the war by itself, but it reshaped the environment in which every other part of the air campaign operated. It turned escort missions into safe passages. It turned offensive sweeps into controlled hunts. And it forced the German Air Force into a defensive posture from which it never recovered. The fear it created was not fear of defeat, it was fear of inevitability. A sense that the sky, once fiercely contested, was now slipping permanently away. As the conflict entered its final year, pilots on both sides understood that the Mustang had become a symbol. For German pilots, it was the shape they dreaded seeing on the horizon. For American crews, it was the reassurance that someone was watching over them. And for history, it became the aircraft that demonstrated how design, training, and determination could combine to change the outcome of an entire theater of war. And that is why German pilots feared the P-51 Mustang, not because it was perfect, but because it arrived at the exact moment when its strengths mattered most, and because it removed the one thing every fighter pilot depends on: control of the fight. Before we end, I want to ask you something simple. Which Mustang strength stands out the most to you? A. Speed. B. Range. C. Precision. Let me know your answer below. If you enjoyed this documentary, don't forget to subscribe. Thanks for watching, and see you in the next one.